that's all. That's all about me. This presentation is about my family. It's kind of an unusual story, and I'll get started. But I want to thank everybody for viewing this afternoon, especially the JCC for inviting me today. It's always a pleasure to talk about my family, and I'm grateful to the J for including me here this afternoon. So back in 2014, I had a B'nai Mitzvah. I wasn't quite 13. I was actually several years older than 13, but I had a B'nai Mitzvah. It was something I had wanted to do for many, many years. But I was struggling with articulating the personal meaning of my Devar Torah, which had to do with the Israelites traveling in the wilderness to find the promised land. The promised land. And as I began to think about traveling in the wilderness, it struck me that my father and mother's life was similar to the Israelites' experience. And today I honor them. There you see them on screen. I honor my parents and all survivors who found life after seeing the worst in humankind. We're all on a journey. Isn't that what life is? With twists and turns and unexpected stops along the way. We're just travelers. Sometimes we think we're going in one direction only to find ourselves going in another. My dad, Karl Lowy, or Charles as he was later known, was a young man in Vienna, Austria in the 1930s. He was born in 1919 as the only child to Arpad and Barbara Cohn Lowy. He was your typical kid. He skied, he played soccer, he was a great swimmer. He had a bar mitzvah, he attended high school, and he planned to attend university and hopefully study engineering. I can't tell you too much about my Viennese grandmother, Barbara. I know she had several sisters whom my dad was very, very fond of, along with many cousins. And my grandfather, Arpad, was originally from Slovakia. He served in the Austro-Hungarian military and worked in the garment industry. Always a dapper looking guy, and you can see he's pretty sharply dressed there, as I recall him as being a really cool dresser. He and Barbara married in their late 20s. Excuse me. Vienna at the turn of the 20th century was a bustling city of 2 million people. It's a very vibrant place. It was the birthplace of the great composers Mozart. Schubert was the home of Sigmund Freud and was considered a world leader in science, philosophy, and research. And it was a melting pot of immigrants from across the empire. But things began to turn in the 1930s. The entry of Hitler's army into Austria in March of 1938 triggered terrible suffering and hardship for Vienna's Jews. Home to 180,000 Jews, men and women were grabbed at random by Nazis and jailed for no reason, while police turned a blind eye of the looting of Jewish homes and businesses. The occupation of Austria, known as the Anschluss, reached its peak over 2 days in November of 1938, when Kristallnacht, Night of Broken Glass, saw the Nazis destroy every synagogue in Vienna and arrest 6,000 citizens. And most of those arrested would end up in Dachau. Jews were gradually robbed of their freedoms. They were blocked from almost all professions. They were shut out of schools and universities and were forced to wear the yellow badge that identified them as a Jew. Well, a knock on the door one day changed everything for my dad's family. A member of the police told my father and grandfather to leave the city. They were given just a couple of days to vacate. No longer considered a rightful citizen of the city that he loved, my 18-year-old dad left his mom behind, who told him things would blow over soon and the women and children would be safe. And he set out on an unexpected, unknown journey. Sarah Miriam Queskin was born on the north side of Chicago in 1919. The child of Polish-born Tauba Kesselman and Lithuanian-born Jack Kweskin, life was not easy for Sarah and her younger brother, Sam. The family struggled financially, and the passing of her dad in 1933, when Sarah was just 14, left the family in deep debt. Forgoing her education, Sarah dropped out of Roosevelt High School to go to work for an uncle. She would live at her Chicago home with her mother until she was 27, when her journey would bring her to an unexpected place. Well, after that fateful knock on the door in 1938, Charles set off with a friend, hoping to get to Switzerland, where they felt they might be safe. At one point, after several days of travel through unfamiliar towns and villages and sleeping in barns and forests to avoid being caught, my dad's friend demanded that they travel in a new direction. My father resisted, knowing that his friend was scared and tired and frustrated. I mean, who wouldn't be? The next morning upon awakening, his friend had abandoned him and stolen the few items that my dad had taken on his trip. Eventually, using his own wiles, my dad made it to Switzerland and found work in camps that were set up by the Swiss government. The friend was never heard from again. The Swiss camps paid the Jewish workers a pittance for backbreaking work. The men were used to clear the roads and to chop down trees and help local farmers, but they weren't incarcerated. He was able to come and go as he pleased. A few years ago, I asked the Illinois Holocaust Museum to translate a diary of my dad's. What I found was eye-opening. I'll be reading excerpts throughout my presentation. Here's one from April 1st, 1940. Charles was now 20 years old. First day at the Swiss work camp. I think you can tell from my handwriting, the work is difficult, extremely difficult. A few days ago, part of the forest was so destroyed by a storm that the pine trees snapped like matches. Our job is to remove the soil from the roots so that the foremen are able to saw through the trunk without getting their blades caught. Of course, I feel completely exhausted, but I'm starting to work on my plan to emigrate to Brazil. I hope it works out. I'm too tired to think right now. Well, as I read my dad's diary, I can feel the worry and confusion and fear in his words. Here's another one from May 10th, 1940. The Germans marched into Holland and Belgium. Switzerland has mobilized for battle. We found this out this afternoon and left the work site in an organized fashion. People are tense. We heard that bombs were dropped in the Jura Mountains. We're expecting internment. What's going on with Papa? I'm pretty nervous. I hope he's with the French. To make matters worse, our radio isn't working, but I'll write more later. It turned out that his dad, in fact, was being detained in France. June 2nd, Charles writes, personally, I'm completely wiped out. This is probably the most difficult work I've ever done. The future prospects look so dim that it's best not to even think about it. The biggest battle of the war thus far has been raging since yesterday on the Western Front. The German army is attacking with 1.5 million men and 3,000 tanks. The French are retreating. Paris and Berlin have been bombed. The complete occupation of France is expected. I received some mail from Papa. He's in a camp in the south of France, and the Japanese are continuing their killing in China. And my dad writes this in mid-July. After a long while, I finally received a letter from Papa again. The tone of the letter was so sad that I now feel down too. Papa's in a camp with thousands of other refugees, and he had to write a letter while standing up since that's all the space he had. He's asking me to do everything possible to get him out of the camp. I'm going to Zurich tomorrow and will do my best to help him. Finally, late summer 1940, my dad receives news that the American Jewish Joint Distribution Commission has arranged for a group of refugees to immigrate to the Dominican Republic, a primitive, undeveloped jungle in the Caribbean. In late July, Charles writes, "The past week has been tough. I've decided to go to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. What awaits me and my compatriots there is a mystery, but one thing is clear. I have to say adieu to Europe and my parents. I'm worried about how Papa is going to take the news. But if my immigration goes well, I might be able to bring Mama and Papa over. I'm doing everything I can to get out of this camp. The ship leaves on August 19th. However, all sorts of things can happen between now and then." So here's a little background on the Dominican Republic. You should know that in 1938, 32 leaders of countries from around the world held a special meeting in Evian, France, to talk about the Jewish problem. They couldn't figure out what to do with the Jews that were trying to leave Europe. Most of the countries that gathered, including the US, decided that they did not want immigrants coming to their country. Although they were sympathetic, they would not welcome them. Except there was one man who was the president of the Dominican Republic. His name was Rafael Trujillo, and he said that 100,000 Jews were welcome to come to his country. 100,000. And Trujillo was a brutal dictator who murdered his own people. He's accused of being responsible for up to 67,000 deaths. It's said that the only reason that he invited the Jews to enter the country was to whiten the populations. His hope was that the Jews and the natives would intermarry. Trujillo was president from 1930 until 1961, when he was assassinated. Well, from Switzerland, Charles traveled through France, where he was able to visit his father, and then on to Lisbon. And while in Lisbon, he received this postcard from his mother. It was dated October 17th, 1940. She writes, "My very dear child, I hope these few lines reach you. Stay healthy and optimistic. Trust yourself and don't let things annoy you. Maybe you'll be with him soon. Stay brave and strong and know that your mother is thinking of you often. Safe travels. Love, Mom." A few months later, on March 12th, 1941, Barbara and about 1,000 other Viennese Jews were rounded up and sent to the Opatov ghetto in Poland. We know this because the International Tracing Service helped us track down the transit information, because the Germans were very good at keeping records. Conditions in the ghetto were, of course, very difficult. My grandmother, Barbara, was already at that point in her 50s, and we don't know if she survived that camp or died in Treblinka, a death camp that was the end of the road for anyone on that March transport. We will assume that her sisters and nieces and nephews all perished as well. Well, a few weeks later, on November 12, 1940, my dad boarded a boat called the Guinée, which first made a stop at Ellis Island. My dad had gotten ill while on the ship, and they wouldn't let him finish his trip to the Dominican Republic, so he had to disembark in all places at Ellis Island for medical care. And here's what he said about Ellis Island. "Ellis Island is a comfortable prison. You stay in a huge hall during the day. There are tables and armchairs for us to sit and clothes racks for our luggage. At the moment, there are about 100 people here. Some are Jews, mainly refugees from Poland and Germany, who were driven from their homes by a crazy man, young and old, a movie magnate from Paris, no more important than a salesman from Germany. Some have been here for 3 or 4 months already and are waiting to see if they can immigrate. Men and women sleep in separate dormitories. Life here reminds me of being in the camp in Switzerland, but under much better conditions, and there's plenty of food and it's good." Well, after 2 weeks at Ellis Island, he was able to set sail on another ship, which took him first to Puerto Rico and then on to the Dominican Republic. The Dominican government welcomed the Jews on the condition that they become agricultural workers, farmers. The Joint Distribution Committee created a special organization called the Dominican Republic Settlement Association, known as DORSA, and funded it to purchase 26,000 acres in the Dominican town of Sosua, which had previously been developed as a banana plantation and then abandoned by the United Fruit Company. Upon arrival, every new Jewish settler was given several acres of land, cows, a mule, and a horse. The Dominican Republic Settlement Association brought in agricultural specialists from Palestine and trained the refugees to farm. Many Jews became experts in dairy production and cheese making. But the program ended in October 1941 when no one was able to travel due to Nazi restrictions. In the end, less than 700 Jews would find freedom in the Dominican Republic. And my dad was lucky to be one of them, along with my grandfather. And my grandfather was able to make it there too, and eventually went on to the United States in 1946. And that's a whole other journey. So let's get back to Sarah Queskin. There she is, the Chicago girl. She was now Sally, as she decided Sarah did not suit her. Her mother, Taba, or Tilly, as I knew her, was at heart a matchmaker. And she was also concerned about her daughter's marriageability. One day, probably in late 1947, while Tilly was shopping at a dress store in Chicago, she happened upon a dapper-looking man and started up a conversation about their children. It probably went something like this. Tilly, I have an unmarried daughter. Oi, she's 27. Arpad, the dapper-looking seller of women's clothes, probably responded, well, here's the address of my son. Maybe they can write to each other. I'm sure they have much in common. And so Sally began a pen pal relationship with a refugee in the jungle of the Dominican Republic, and thus began the start of a new journey. What they wrote to each other, who knows? What she told him about her life, what he told her about his, can only be imagined. And Sally, deciding to throw caution to the wind, made arrangements to fly to the Dominican Republic to meet this man, this stranger in a strange land. Can you imagine that? This was 1948. On February 1st, she took the longest trip of her life. And on February 14th, in a Spanish language ceremony, she said sí when asked if she took this man in matrimony. My mom would tell me that during that ceremony, she had no idea what the Spanish officiant was saying, only that my dad elbowed her every time she needed to say sí. They both settled in Chicago in the summer of 1948 and had a son the following year, my brother Jack, and I came along a few years later. My parents were married for 51 years. My dad passed in 1999 and my mom in 2012. It's funny where your journey can take you, isn't it? The story of the 700 survivors is a little known one. Think of what those European refugees must have thought when they landed in the Caribbean. It was the promised land. They created lives for themselves by learning to farm the jungle, to build homes, to celebrate the high holidays, to find freedom, and to leave a legacy that I'm proud to be a part of. A couple of years ago, we were honored to be asked to be part of the Illinois Holocaust Museum's wonderful exhibit called Stories of Survival, which showcased survivors of many different conflicts around the globe. Well, we created a poster with the handprints of the 9 great-grandchildren of Charles and Sally, which of course showcases their legacy. Now 11 great-grandchildren later, and actually there's going to be a 12th. We know that they would be very happy to see the family flourish. And there you go. There's all sorts of pictures of my family. So I did a little research on the DR to bring you up to date on what is there today. According to Wikipedia, 3,000 Jews reside in both the capital, Santo Domingo, and in Sosúa. There are 3 synagogues there, including a Chabad. The Chabad Outreach Center focuses on assisting the local Jewish population reconnect with their Jewish roots, and it's a source for traditional Judaism. In Sosúa, there's a small Jewish museum next to the synagogue. And on the high holidays, the Sosúa community hires a cantor from abroad who comes to lead services. Survivors of the war who lived in the DR in the 40s used to hold reunions. And I remember my parents attending back in the 90s. They just loved seeing their old friends. So here's a couple more slides. This is a picture of a customs receipt, a customs slip that declares what my dad brought in to this country from the DR. Dated July 3rd, 1948. If you look closely, you can see he brought in 480 cigarettes and no declaration of a wife. The next slide is a letter from DORSA, the Dominican organization that acknowledges my dad's expertise in agriculture. It's dated 1944 and appears to be a reference letter, perhaps for another position that he was looking for in the Dominican Republic. This slide is one of an interview that my dad and mom did in 1986 for the Sun Sentinel newspaper in Florida. Several years ago, the Jewish Heritage Museum in New York had an exhibit called Dominican Haven. This is the book that was created to go along with the exhibit. The couple farming there on the cover were Jews from Berlin who came to the DR in 1940. They're Rosa and Heinz Lesser. They, the Lessers, had recently sent their 3 young children, ages 3, 6, and 9, on the kinder transport to Sweden. And then they eventually made it to the DR. In this pic, Rosa is 28, Heinz is 31. They would not see their children again for 10 years. The amazing thing about this couple is that I connected with their granddaughter and have been friends with her for the last several years. And my friend's mom was one of the children on that kinder transport. So I'll wrap things up by saying, may all of these good people's memories be a blessing, along with everyone that we lost in the war. And I thank you for listening. If you have any questions, I'd be very happy to answer as much as I can.
Amen to that blessing, Kitty. Thank you so much for sharing. We only have one question right now in the chat, so feel free, please put any questions you'd like in the chat. The question right now is, did your father speak English when he met Sally?
Yeah, my dad, I believe when he was in school in Austria, studied English. He also knew French and he knew Spanish. He was multilingual, so he was able to communicate to everybody. My mom, not so much, but my dad for sure.
Kitty, my meeting ended, so I got to jump on. What do you hope that people get from hearing the story?
Well, first of all, there are so many stories that came out of the war, so many incredible stories just like this. And I think that if we always take the idea of hope, that we have to have hope that we're going to survive, and maybe a little bit of luck. I mean, it's an unusual story with a very happy ending. I also think that there's an interesting twist to this because, and a moral question, because you had Rafael Trujillo, who was a bad guy. He was a bad guy. But I'm here because he saved 700 people, although he had wanted to save 100,000, but he was a despot and he killed his own people. So it's an interesting way to think about it, right? I mean, I sometimes struggle with that idea that I'm here because of his generosity, I'm putting that in quotes, and 700 people survived, but he was really a terrible person. So I think there's a lot of to unpack around that.
Do you think that people knew his reputation and that's why they didn't take the opportunity to leave? Or do you think that, like many people who didn't try and get out when they could, they thought, oh, this will be a temporary thing and we don't have to run away?
Yeah, I mean, I think just like my grandmother of blessed memory, who thought it would be over and people would be safe because nobody could have possibly imagined what the outcome was going to be. Nobody in their wildest dreams could have imagined what was going to happen. So I think that it was also a matter of getting the paperwork through the Joint Distribution Committee and I don't have that piece. Obviously, my dad traveled somewhere and was able to get papers, and I believe he was able to get the papers for his dad so that they both ended up in the DR, but that's only 700 people. That's a very small amount. It could have been that there were thousands more who had paperwork to go at a later date, but the Nazis closed off the travel. So there may have been hundreds, thousands more who could have gotten in. There's just pieces I can't articulate because I don't know the full story, and it's tough to find it. Most people are gone now. It's hard to get all the information.
To think of what the Dominican Republic would have looked like if 100,000 Jews were there instead of just 700. So
yeah, but you're right, and they did intermarry. There were a number of people who did intermarry. There are Jewish Dominicans that are still there. Obviously, there's 3 synagogues, which is amazing. At least the last time I did my research, there were 3 synagogues still there. So there are practicing Dominicans who took the faith of their parents, their grandparents, and continue to worship. So.
And to kind of
sorry, Matt, what I always find really remarkable is that the Nazis could have let those 100,000 people go, just been rid of them, but I guess they just wanted them dead.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Why not allow them to get into the Dominican Republic? What difference would it have made, except 100,000 would have created hundreds of thousands more. And I think really the idea was to eradicate the tribe. So.
To comment on what you said a few minutes ago, it's getting hard to get the information because a lot of people are gone now. I'm kind of combining a few different questions in the chat. Besides the diary, which is such a great source, a beautiful, rich source of background and information. Where did you get all of the info from the story? Is it all just personal account? And then were your parents very open about the story, or did it kind of take years of pulling bits of information here and there? Or?
Well, like any child who grows up with parents who go through any kind of a trauma, the information is limited. And children don't ask questions because you just grow up with what it is, and you don't, that's just who your parents are. That's just who your dad is. I think I learned more from my mom because she told me a lot about her experience going to the Dominican Republic and filled in some of the pieces about what happened with my dad. The diary is, I was so thrilled to find that and have that translated because that really helped me create this presentation. But I'm sorry, what was the rest of your question? I don't even know if I answered it, Matt.
No, it was like kind of where did a lot of the information come from besides the diary? Was it all personal research? Were we asking specific questions after we learned the diary, or how did it all kind of come about?
Yeah, so I mean, I put the presentation together well after my dad was gone and after my mom was gone too. So I only had bits and pieces to work off of. I did research on the Dominican Republic. I did research on the Jews that were there. I have my girlfriend whose mom was on the kinder transport and eventually went to the DR, so I was able to ask her some questions. So bits and pieces I was able to pull together from historical archives. And what I tell you specifically about my dad's experience came from the diary and what my mom told me.
One of the questions in the chat is any more information about why your grandfather left your father in the DR and went to the US?
I think, and I don't know how the system worked, but he must have applied for something and was able to get out before. Now, keep in mind, and I think this is an important piece, is that my dad married an American woman. So I believe that was his ticket to ride. And he was able to then leave. He left, she left the end of March, I believe. They married in February. I think she was there for 6 weeks and he was able to leave in July. So it may have just for him, it may have been because he married her. My grandfather, he may have had some connection with someone in the States who had some paperwork or what. I wish I had all of those specific pieces of information of how my father got out in 46 and he couldn't get my dad out in 46.
Like you said, it's just pieces of an incredible journey, like one right after another.
It is, and both, it was a journey for both of my parents, because quite honestly, these two people in no way would have ever been together in any way, shape, or form. I mean, for a myriad of reasons, they would not have been together. But the war created unusual circumstances and unusual relationships, and people getting together with people out of whether it's desperation or a need to connect with somebody or a need to feel as though you're part of a family. I think that you find that if you talk to a lot of children of survivors whose parents married after the war or found themselves each in a camp, they all married for reasons that were very personal to them, and love might not have been the first one.
Question is, could your father have stayed in the US when he was at Ellis Island? Like, was that a choice that he made, and why didn't he, if he could have?
So he had gotten some illness when he was on the ship, and they made him debark at Ellis Island. And since his papers were not for the States and they were for the DR, he only stayed at Ellis Island for medical care. So close, right? So close. And yet he had to go on to the Dominican Republic. So it's kind of ironic.
Anyone else like to ask a question? Welcome to pop it into the chat, or you could almost come off mute now. I think we're all able to discuss.
Kitty, do you think putting on my, co-director of the JCC Chicago Jewish Film Festival hat, do you think you'll ever maybe write a screenplay or have someone write a screenplay and make a film about this? I mean, this is how we're learning so much about these small, and I don't mean small in a negative way, but these smaller, more intimate stories. This is how we're learning them, and then they're on film, and you have it for to share through generations.
Well, I mean, all right, being funny for a second, I have to think who would play me and my mom, but being serious, this is something that I have toyed with. I wouldn't even know where to start on that journey to get that ball rolling, but I do believe that this is a story that could certainly be on the screen, because I think that it has so many elements to it that are so interesting, and the woven story of the Chicago girl and the man in the jungle and how they meet. So if anyone knows a film, somebody in film or a director, I mean, Hillary, you do the film festival, so
I was just gonna say, I know you runs a Jewish film festival. So
yeah,
I
let's
think
talk offline and see if Eileen and I can make you some introductions, or we can work with the Holocaust Museum and figure something out. Because I mean, these kinds of stories and then turning them into films, they become treasures that allow us to never forget.
Right, but this is, I think, because this is one of those tinier stories that have so much twists and turns and so many just interesting parts to it. When you think of 700 people, it's a drop in the bucket, right? But those 700 people went on to create families and legacies, and so yeah, I'm ready for the silver screen, man. That's
drop in the bucket are the interesting stories that we all want to hear about, right?
Yeah,
right.
No one wants to hear about the ocean. We all want to hear about that one little drop. And also, just so you know, I have in the chat, Meryl Streep could play Kitty, is what it said.
yeah.
I bet I can figure out who made that comment in the chat box.
Well, it would actually be my mom, not me, because I wasn't in the picture yet. So we'll have to figure out what redhead could play my mom. So
Kitty,
yes.
I have a question. Did your dad have a backyard garden or anything that since he had a knowledge of agriculture?
Did in the Dominican Republic or
No,
later on?
in Chicago.
Yeah, later in life.
Actually, yeah. Well, they had lived in Florida, and he was growing citrus. And what's funny is that when I was growing up, he was liking papayas and mangoes and avocado and stuff that nobody was eating in the 1960s. So I always wondered what kind of things are these, but he when he lived there, these were the foods that he was partaking in. But yeah, he did some gardening in his later years.
Anyone else? Well, we have this amazing storyteller in front of us. Any other follow-up questions, comments about the story we just heard?
Okay. Bette Midler for Kitty's mother.
Oh, yeah. I want you to all be thinking about this.
Okay.
And I'm happy to entertain the idea. Hillary, I'm going to hold you to this. You got the film festival, so let's do it.
All right, I'm gonna put it on my goals for next fiscal year, how to get Kitty's film made. We've done so many things with films, but we've never actually helped somebody make a film. So we'll have to see what we can do. I'm up for the challenge.
Me as well. You know what? COVID is just kind of inhibited everybody these last couple of years. So I'm ready to break out.
but COVID's also, and I'm not always the optimist, but we've had the opportunity to talk to people all over the world about film and books that we would have never been able to do. So
Yeah, right. Well, I know from terrible things springs new opportunity,
Yep,
right?
exactly.
So Matt and I were talking about that, how my synagogue turned around in 1 second when COVID hit and created an amazing online presence and a platform for people to meet. And so really create the creativity that sprang from COVID is pretty amazing. And I don't think we're done seeing the creativity as a result of.
Sadly, I think we have to agree with you. So we
Yeah.
were hoping
Flexibility is
that
one of our
Community
strengths.
Tuesdays would go back in person in 2022, but it looks like we're going to be hanging out for some time in this situation. But
Well, and
Matt,
with-
do you have any more questions?
I was just gonna say, with this great collection of people, I think we're gonna, if and when we do return in person, I think the online community is so strong. We're gonna keep bringing these things to you online and hopefully in person when we're all back and safe and ready. So thank you so much, Katie. That story was absolutely amazing and inspirational. Like, thank you so much for joining us.
It was my pleasure. It's great to see everybody or see everybody's names on screen. At least thank you for joining me today. I really enjoyed myself, and thanks to the Jay and my husband who was helping with video, and Matt.
I guess-
and
I don't know
everybody.
if the public forum is appropriate to ask, but someone asked, will this be posted online afterwards? And I said, well, if Kitty's okay with the presentation being posted, then we
Sure.
might post it up on our YouTube.
Of course, not a problem at all.
Well, thank you
At
so
all.
much.
Awesome.
It's great
Thanks,
seeing you all.
everybody. Don't miss
Thank
out
you.
this weekend. We have the last 3 films in our JCC Chicago Jewish Film Festival Social Justice Series. So visit our website, jccchicago.org. And then we've got a couple of other films coming up with Holocaust ties. So you can see our website for that as well. And Spring Festival is going to be up soon. So, we're going to do some in-person films. So be on the lookout for all that. Again, jccchicago.org. Next week with CJE. Same time. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thanks.
everyone.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year, everyone. Bye.